Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Deltarune video. Well, the playthrough is over. Now it's time to analyze, at least a little bit. If you didn't watch the 12 Days of Deltarune, which was a bunch of goofy Deltarune videos before the chapters released, I did a video ranking all of my theories going in, which is everything up until chair theory. I guess you could also include alt DT theory, but that wasn't in the first video. Anyway, now I'm going to essentially re-rank them and see how many of them have survived, how many of them have basically died. And also there's a little extra one on here just to sort of foreshadow an upcoming theory I have in mind. So, as you see, we've got a full gamut of options here for the tier list. Fully canonized, I don't think there's only like one in here, I think. Let me look and see. Actually, I don't know if there's going to be any in there, but you know, now that I'm looking again. Strong support, some counter evidence, major counter evidence, and fully debunked. There's definitely going to be some in fully debunked, that's for sure. So let's talk about Darkner origins. I'm going to give a brief description of these theories, but do keep in mind, because this is something I feel like may have been slightly troublesome the last time I did this, is I'm just giving you a small little taste of what the actual theory is. If you want to go watch the theory video to learn the full thing, maybe some of your questions about it might be answered there, but I understand if you don't. Darkner origins. This was basically just my theory trying to figure out what the light world equivalent was to every Darkner. And I mean, we got, it's got to be strong support. This is the one I'd maybe put in fully canonized. But there are some that are still a little bit suspicious. Like, we don't actually know what Starwalker is, for example. Even, I think in the theory I say he's a sticker, which to me makes sense, but hey. We did get confirmation that Queen is the laptop, though. Because in this video there was a question of whether Queen is the laptop or specifically just the motherboard, because she has so many traits associated with being motherly. So we did find out she's the laptop, so that helps. That's a little bit of more evidence. But yeah, that's that. Unfortunately, Twin Apocalypses seems to be like totally shot at this point. I was very confident in this one going in. The idea that the Angel's Heaven and the Roaring were actually two separate events. But then in chapter 4, the Titan grows angel wings, so I'm not sure I'm so confident in this one anymore. What can you say? We didn't really get any information about Birdley's parents, which I guess kind of makes sense. I mean, I might have maybe suspected something in the weird route, but no, we didn't. So I'm gonna put it in some support and just know that there's like no real new evidence. It's just like, they're both birds. It's a character from Undertale, so it makes sense if she'd come back. Yeah, that's basically it. Chapter 3 is about relationships. I mean, Chapter 3 is over, so this one, it's not fully canonized, so it should probably go in fully debunked, but it's kind of true. Chapter 3, I would say its main theme is about nostalgia. The Tenna's whole thing is about trying to, throw back to when the family was together, all of that. And you're playing this like nostalgic video game, but for most of the time, it really does feel like that's probably the main theme, which it kind of includes this whole relationship angle that I was going through with my predictions. But I think I have to put it in here because it wasn't technically true. The same with chapter 4 equals music, because if anything, chapter 4 was much closer to equaling writing, but I don't think anybody could have predicted it's mostly the prophecy. There was a lot of musical stuff though, right? So it's not entirely incorrect, but like specifically, especially like Gwei is not, it's not based on music at all. So Sneaking song theory fully debunked. Carol did not show up in chapter 3. And it's funny because the sneaking sections still existed. They were just like normal sneaking sections. So I don't know why the song included Lost Girl. I really don't. There's some really liberal usage of Lost Girl in these chapters. Like, it gets used for Ralsei. I'm not sure how that makes sense. Even like the Susie being sort of like a parallel to Desk, it kind of makes sense it might play for her sometimes. Even though she's kind of completely unrelated from the Holiday family, where, you know, it playing for Noelle, that makes sense. It's basically Desk's theme song. So it playing in the Holiday house, that makes a lot of sense. But then, like, why would it play in Ralsei's room? I don't know. Anyway, Chris and Susie fell into the bunker. There is no counter evidence in this chapter for this. The idea is essentially that the intro area of chapter 1, like the closet, shows these pillars, which you can see in this image, that look a little bit like floorboards. So the idea was that when Susie and Chris actually fell, or when Susie and Chris fell in the closet and then fell into the dark world, they actually literally fell from the closet into the bunker, which would naturally run underneath important buildings like the school, right? I think there is maybe a little bit. I'll put it in some support. This is probably where I'd put it, even if there was nothing, because we do get the intro area in chapter 3, which seems to be like on the couch or near the carpet, and we get a lot of the same stuff. Like, we get the big rolling hills in the background that are clearly the fabric, which means that these pillars are something. Like, they're not just arbitrary, like, you know, spooky background. They definitely are something. And then we had the dust and all that stuff that was also under the couch that we kind of saw. The little giggling guys that show up in both this intro segment and the chapter 3 one. Yeah, I don't know. I still think this is a decent theory for sure. Sunlight defeats Dark Worlds is fully debunked, I think. My idea was that natural light... The reason why Sham says a line which is like, you should get out of the Dark World before the sun goes down, essentially. That's paraphrasing, by the way, for sure. Was because once the sun goes down, you can't leave a Dark World naturally, right? So they'd be essentially, Chris and Susie would be trapped in Castletown and they would have to seal the fountain to escape or wait until the sun comes up. But we know that time works differently in Dark World, so that could take a really long time, right? But no, they're able to leave Chapter 3's Dark World even though it's nighttime. So that's definitely... I mean, I guess it's not fully debunked. There's still a chance that this could be true, but it's not the only way, clearly. You can still leave through any doorway. So, I don't know. I think I'll just leave it in fully debunked. Shama Lovania, there was nothing specifically new that pointed to Sham being a boss, I don't think. Other than maybe that line from King, which I definitely misinterpreted in my playthrough, where he says something about the cat's smile or whatever left when Jevil got sealed away. And I was like, wait, Image Friend? Because Image Friend is a cat. That's confirmed, but again, we'll get there. So I think I'm going to put, like, I'm going to put it in some support. Because, again, we didn't get any real information about it. So everything I talk about in the video is still true, but we didn't, you know, it didn't get any better or worse, essentially. Narnia Theories is interesting. I feel like I probably have to put it in some counter evidence. Because the idea that, like... Okay, the basis of this theory is we go into a closet that opens up into a brand new world in Chapter 1, which is obviously very reminiscent of Narnia. The mayor seems to be an important figure. She's probably got ice powers because Noelle does. There's, you know, the Ice Queen. There seems to be 4 protagonists. Noelle, Susie, Chris, and Ralsei, which is similar to Narnia. Ralsei's even like a goat, so maybe Ralsei is actually Mr. Tumnus or whatever. It's very loose. The idea is just like there's a lot of Narnia parallels. Oh yeah, and Lord of the Hammer feels very Narnia-esque. And we did learn in these chapters that Lord of the Hammer is actually based on religion, the same way Narnia is. So I don't know. It's like between some support and some counter evidence. I think I'll put it here, though, because I'm not sure the mayor is going to fill the role that she would have if she's like, it would require the mayor to be the knight, which I find very unlikely at this current moment. We'll talk about that when we get to the knight candidates here. Gerson was a boss monster. I feel like this is probably, I mean, it's not fully debunked, but has major counter evidence now, because if that was true, I feel like we would have learned that when he showed up in chapter 4. So, yeah, what can I say? I never thought I'd be doing this. Shadows on the Wall has gone like way up in possibility. This theory was essentially that there's a philosophical theory called Shadows on the Wall, where essentially the idea is if you put a person in a cave with a torch for their entire life, their reality is whatever they see as a shadow cast by the torch on the wall. So if their knowledge of a dog is when a dog went by the entrance of the cave and then cast a shadow on the wall. So it's essentially saying it's impossible to find true reality because we have no idea whether we're the person in the cave or not, right? Like, who knows? Maybe our, like, human bodies, That's the philosophical theory. In terms of Deltarune, the idea was darkners are the shadows on the wall, right? There are connotations, our perceptions of objects casted to become a thing, which, like, basically the beginning of chapter 3 straight up confirms. The final conclusion, though, the reason why I can't put it in fully canonized, was that Gaster is trying to create a world of pure darkness, because then there's no shadows on the wall. There's also no reality anymore. So all that would be real is your mind. And in that case, the memories of him from even other timelines maybe could essentially reconstitute him as a real being instead of being fractured across time and space, right? That, I feel like, is still very unlikely. That's very much like a fan theory, what am I trying to say? It's very, very speculative still. Although I don't think it's a bad idea, and it will come up in this night theory I'm going to make in the coming weeks here. Ralsei is Chris. This is interesting because on the one hand, Ralsei seems to be fairly, like, they seem to sort of highlight that Ralsei is very similar to Gerson, right? In the way that, like, Gerson is also a special Darkner because he's technically not a Darkner, And they do say that Ralsei specifically says he's a Darkner. He can't come to the light world. That's also true of Gerson, but Gerson also isn't technically a Darkner in some sense of the word. So that's, like, some evidence. The basics of this theory is the idea that Ralsei is based on the perceptions of Chris by either Chris themselves when they were a child or the people of hometown. Like, maybe even it's just like Susie's perceptions of Chris before Susie actually got to know Chris, right? And we did learn that in chapter 4 that a Lightner, their perceptions do influence the dark world that they create. So it's possible that that extends to chapter 1 with Susie, and that's why Ralsei is exactly the way that Ralsei is. But the actual mechanics of it, where, like, our soul doesn't belong to Chris, so Chris's body creates Ralsei, and our soul creates our perceptions of Chris, which is this, like, knight in shining armor protagonist character. Probably not any extra evidence for that either. So I feel like that's probably where it goes. Chair theory completely debunked. I can't believe the chair showed up so early too. I do have to say, though, for the people that might be still a little confused on this, That appears to be Susie's room. We don't technically know that for sure yet, but I'd say it's very likely to be Susie's room. And the reason why Image Friend is a cat is because this blanket on top of the 2 chairs posts, when you turn the lights off, right? And, your mind plays tricks on you in the dark. The blanket would go across the 2 top pieces of the chair to make it look like cat ears. And the reason it has 8 legs in that image is because the chair is probably casting shadows, which make it look like it has more than 4 legs. So essentially, Image Friend is like Susie's sleep paralysis demon. I'm not really sure how that works, but I feel like that's why the imagery was chosen in that particular scene. Whether or not Friend is related to Susie, I guess we'll have to see. Okay, now we're into purely new stuff that I have to talk about. Let's actually start with chess theory, because chess theory I feel like is pretty much debunked completely. Chapter 4 didn't even have a standard final boss. Like, unless you consider Gerson to be like the, main character of the chapter in the same vein as Tenna or Queen. Because I'd be totally willing to write off Chapter 3 as a fluke, because Chapter 3 is obviously very different than what what the other fountains are like. Chris didn't make the other fountains. That's the main difference, probably. But also Chapter 4 doesn't have a bishop or a rook or a knight. I guess it does have a knight, but that would be knight twice in a row. So anyway, I think chess theory is basically dead, which I really was not expecting. I don't know why. It just felt like, okay, it'll be worked in there in some sort of, less than obvious way. Like, it'll get less and less obvious as time goes on, but no, just totally gone. Okay, alternate determination theory. So the reason why I didn't have this on my original video is I felt like it wasn't probably going to come up at all. But the premise of this video is essentially, how did Chris create a dark fountain if Queen seems to imply the dark fountains need to be created with determination? And what we know about the soul from Undertale would imply that determination is housed inside the soul. Therefore, Chris took their soul out, put us in the couch at the end of Chapter 2. How do they create a dark fountain after that? And the weird part is, the knight seems to imply that, if you assume that the knight is the person talking to Chris on the phone in Chapter 4, inside the Holiday Mansion, that they need the soul to create a dark fountain. But that's not technically true. I think you could also read it as they need the soul to seal a dark fountain. So they need to get the soul back eventually to go on like the church dark fountain adventure that the knight is clearly setting up somehow. So I don't know. I feel like I'm putting it in some support. The basic idea was, okay, if Chris isn't getting determination from their soul, where are they getting it from? And the idea of Chris being kind of like Flowey in the way that they got injected with determination from, like, I don't know, Gaster, for example, in the bunker, maybe? I think there is a lot of evidence to suggest that Chris did encounter Gaster in the bunker, or at least, like, a piece of Gaster in the bunker, which that'll come up in this video too. Alvin Knight. Shockingly, despite being deconfirmed, the actual details of Alvin Knight, like the reasons why we were presuming Alvin could be the Knight, seem to be mostly true. Like, they all ended up happening, even though, like, the motivation was wrong, right? The idea of him desperately wanting to bring Gerson back is definitely true. And the fact that the hammer would be able to do that is also true. And the fact that he dug up the hammer in the first place. I also think it might be possible that he created the fountain in the foyer. Maybe? The fountain in the foyer, like the first fountain for the Dark Sanctuary, is very odd to me because it's so small. Like, even Susie's, who we'd never, like, you could make the argument, okay, well, monsters have less determination, so maybe that's why. But, like, no, Susie's fountain is a normal size. So why would it be so small? And of the characters who could have made it, because, like, obviously Toriel and everybody associated with the choir were not there. Noelle was not there. The mayor seems way too determined to make a fountain that shrimpy. I feel like the only one that makes sense would be Alvin. And the idea would be that Alvin witnessed the knight make the fountain in the like main church area. And then he was like, well, I should give that a try. And then he did. The only problem is, why would he not then go see Gerson? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what happened to him. There's somebody in the closet of the church, clearly. Somebody that Chris doesn't want us to see. And that could also be Alvin. Maybe he and Gerson actually did have a conversation. And it just went really poorly. So Alvin left, essentially. And Gerson decided to write that letter that Susie then writes for Alvin after the fact, to be like, oh yeah, I didn't come to church, and it wasn't because I didn't want to support you, it's because I wanted you to, you know, spread your own wings and not be in my shadow, essentially. So I don't know, I feel like I have to put it in some counter evidence, because like the actual surrounding points are mostly kind of correct. It's just Alvin actually being the knight is clearly wrong. I mean, I guess technically there's nothing that precludes him from being the knight, except for the fact that the knight doesn't look anything like him. Alright. Speaking of knights, let's talk about knights. So, I want to talk about Noelle Knight. Okay, we'll do Chris Knight, Noelle Knight, Mayor Knight, then Des Knight, alright? And I definitely had a lot of other knight theories, but they were mostly for fun. Like, I don't think any of us really believed that, like, Alphys was going to be the knight. And clearly not now. Unless this is Alphys's edgy OC, maybe. But I felt like these three specifically were pretty strong ideas, and then Des Knight seems to be the strongest idea in retrospect, so that's why I chose these four specifically. So Chris Knight, I feel like we have to put it in major counter evidence, because Chris, again, it's kind of like Alvin Knight. Chris being the knight, I feel, is pretty much fully debunked, right? We saw them fight each other. So Chris is clearly not the Roaring Knight. However, Chris does seem to be working with the Roaring Knight. And it's unclear whether or not Chris did the things that Chris Knight theory says they did, which is create the first two dark fountains, the one in the classroom and the one in the computer lab. And actually, there is some evidence that kind of counters some of the counters to Chris Knight theory. In the weird route, you get dialogue that says that Chris was able to not only take Birdley all the way to the hospital from the library, but then go all the way to Noelle's house, which includes, I assume, jumping over the fence somehow, because they don't have a key, unless, of course, I guess maybe Carol gave them a key if they're working together, but I don't know. I digress. And then was able to go to Noelle and assure her that everything would be okay. So, like, clearly the idea that Chris is too weak to do that is false. To, like, too weak to get to the library without the soul? Yeah, that's clearly not true. So, yeah. I feel like the major overarching, again, it's kind of like Alvin Knight. Maybe I should put them on the same level. The actual idea that Chris is the knight is incorrect. But, like, all the surrounding points people made, I feel like, are actually still fairly possible? Weirdly enough. Noelle Knight. Literally the same case again. Noelle is clearly not the knight, I would say. She had opportunity to make the classroom fountain and the library fountain. Birdley would have to be an idiot to not see it, but Birdley is an idiot, so thankfully that works out. She does not, however, have the opportunity to make the church fountains. And even if Alvin made one of them, or like somebody else made the foyer fountain, she's clearly not able to get to the church from her house so fast. But the actual idea that Noelle was originally supposed to be in the Dark Worlds with Chris and Ralsei does seem to be somewhat supported by these prophecy scenes where we see the girl has a sword, which Noelle is known for having lots of pencils, right? Whereas Susie is widely known for using an axe. So I think it has to go in here too. It's kind of crazy. All this stuff we picked up on, we were right. It's just the actual conclusion of that's why they're the knight was wrong. Isn't that funny? I gotta talk about Mayor Knight though, because really the two knight candidates people are fighting about right now are Des and Mayor Knight. I should also make it clear that, like, in this image, that's my old sprite for the mayor before we actually knew who she was. And this is my sprite for Des. Obviously, we don't have a sprite for Des yet. I don't think the mayor can be the knight. And look, I was kind of proven wrong about some of the Chris Knight stuff. And I was very adamant about Chris Knight stuff being, like, you know, there was a lot of counter evidence there. I feel like I'm falling into the same trap again. But it's true again. How did Carol get from her own house back to the church before Chris and Susie? How? It's just like, okay, depending on how you play, that could make sense. If you, like, explore the full world and, like, go talk to Burger Pants, that gives her enough time to get back. But she still has to talk to Noelle, and then assumedly probably talk to Asgore, because Asgore's, like, waiting there for her, it seems like. I don't know. I don't see how that's possible. I think it's definitely possible that Carol could be working with the knight in a similar way it seems like Chris could be working with the knight. But again, I gotta, you know, talk about it in this video. Well, the knight definitely does have antlers that resemble Carol's more than anybody else's we've seen so far. But that's literally the only... Well, okay, the black katana also does resemble Carol. She has a black katana in her room. But other than that, those are the only things that connect Carol with the knight. And the timeline just seems so messed up, man. Death Knight. Shockingly strong support, I would say. Des is a character sort of like Azrael, when we were talking about Azrael Knight, who could go anywhere in town. It would just have to be under the cover of nightfall so nobody saw them. You know what I mean? And it does seem fairly possible that's true of the knight that we've seen. The knight's clearly got deer antlers. When the knight starts the battle in chapter 3, they do a very baseball-like maneuver with their arm moving up towards what looks like a bat, and then it turns into a sword, which is very confusing. They turn into a ball, even. And Des seems to be very important to the story, despite the fact she is not here. You know what I mean? She's playing a very Azrael-type role, like comparing to Undertale, where Azrael was very important to the story, even though we didn't see him. We had no idea until the end that Flowey, basically our main antagonist, was in fact Azrael. Seems very comparable here. Maybe too comparable is the only problem. We'll see, I suppose. Alright. I have to give big apologies to the Universal Mother theory. Because I think I put it in like B tier or something, because I was like, okay, the only thing I don't like in this theory is the idea that Toriel's an alcoholic, because clearly that's taken from not only scrapped dialogue from the alarm clock that never released, but she's clearly in very different circumstances in Undertale than she is in Deltarune. So would she really need to cope the same? Well, turns out. Turns out yes. So, oops. Didn't quite get that one. I think this theory is exceptionally strong now. Basically, the idea is that Queen represents everybody's moms. Clearly, we get a lot of explanation, I guess is a word I could use, that Queen is a lot like Carol, right? Overly controlling, you know, wants Noelle to essentially be a peon. Whereas, you know, in Birdley's case, she mostly, you know, finds him annoying and wants him to, you know, leave her alone, which, yikes, for Birdley, if true. And then with Chris, Queen doesn't really seem to understand Chris that much, and the alcoholism, or at least the usage of alcohol just casually, may be related to Toriel, which we do see in Chapter 4's ending. So, yeah, that's really what it is. Mad Cat's theory. This is hilarious because both halves of this theory are true, but they don't go together. The idea is that Friend is a cat. That's the one side of the theory. And the other side of the theory is that Friend is related to a knockoff controller that Asriel used in the Dreamer House. And you do use that knockoff controller to do the secret boss stuff in Chapter 3, which was basically what this theory was. Friend is going to be the secret boss in Chapter 3. So, like, that's all true. You do use the knockoff controller for the secret boss in Chapter 3. And Friend is a cat. Friend, however, is not the secret boss in Chapter 3. So, I feel like I have to put this in... I'll put it in strong support, because literally like 80% of the theory seems to be almost canon at this point. It's just the fact that I almost said Sham. Friend is the Chapter 3 secret boss is fully deconfirmed. Purple guy. Well, Purple. In this chapter, he is working at the cafe. The basis behind this theory, it's kind of a joke theory, let's be clear, is that nobody knows who this guy is. So if the knight is somebody who has to hide their identity, what better way than in this weird mascot costume, right? And it would have the added benefit for when people search up who is the knight Deltarune to try to spoil themselves, it would come up as Purple Guy. Like, people would be making memes about Purple Guy, and they might just think, people are being funny about Five Nights at Freddy's, but I want to find the truth, and I don't find it. You know, like, it's a stealthy way to hide a spoiler with the fact that it's a spoiler from a different game. You know what I mean? I mean, there isn't really any counter evidence to say that this guy isn't important. There's also no evidence to say this guy is important. So I'm just not gonna rank. I'm just not gonna rank it. Okay, the knight is fear. I don't want to spoil too much, but I want to give you the idea so you can start thinking about it. And maybe you can leave some comments to say if I'm totally out of line. So that I can, when I'm making the video, be like, oh, well, this is how this gets around that. So the interesting thing about Image Friend and the Titans is that Image Friend and the Titan spawns very vaguely are reminiscent of memory heads, which we already know are sort of related to Gaster. Sort of. They play, what is it? They play a similar sound to one of the sounds related with Gaster, or they have a value in the game's code that's like 666, so it's related to Gaster. I can't quite remember. But Image Friend definitely resembles the amalgamate, like the dog amalgamate from Undertale. And I feel like that could be because Image Friend is two objects, right? Image Friend is a chair with a blanket over the top of it. If you took the blanket off of the top, this sort of like cat ear shape at the top of the head would not be there. It would be two horns, right? So it's essentially an amalgamation of objects that is making Image Friend a reality. Similarly with the knight, I feel like an amalgamation of objects might be the most logical explanation. And because we've been given this explanation of how a Lightner could essentially become a Darkner with Gerson, perhaps a certain object mixed with Dess's dust could create a Darkner-Lightner hybrid that is able to create fountains with, determination. but is also a darkener in all, you know, senses of the word. And so this like transformation and magic that they are able to do, which seems to only be allowed for darkeners, also makes sense. Now, I'm not going to tell you what this item would be, but the reason why I say the knight is fear is because let's think about the knight's character design. The knight has Carol's antlers and her sword. The knight also has Gaster's hand holes and a skeletal rib cage. The knight has Dess's bat. What are all these things possibly, what could all these possible things mean together is the question. And I will leave you with that. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like and subscribe. And leave a comment if you think any of these theories in particular had significantly more or less evidence than I feel they do. Also, if you are interested in the Knight is Fear, which is a video I'm going to be coming out with soon-ish, when it's, you know, ready, you could leave a comment about that too, about what you think I'm talking about, or how you think that would not work at all. So, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.